So in this video I'm going to show you how to fit your handles. Now, because we've got lots of different options for the handles, i.e. it depends on what you're making your exterior from and what you've made your handles from, I'm going to have to show you several different methods. Now, I'm not going to make 4 different bags to show you each method. What I'm doing is I'll show you how to use faux leather on my fabric one, which is the one that I'm making for the video. But I am going to show you how to fit the others options, so the faux leather onto faux leather, using a little sample that is just, this is the sort of top corner of our panel. So I've made my little aperture. I haven't even used a facing, I've literally raw edge cut that, but just wanted to show you how to actually fit the handles. So the first thing, if you're using faux leather, you will not have put your foam on at this point. You won't have put your foam on whichever option you're using, but you will be making a mark that goes right the way across the bag, that is 3 1/8 of an inch from the top edge. And depending on how accurate you have been making your apertures, that should come pretty much halfway across the height of your aperture. Now, if you're using faux leather and you're using faux leather for your straps, or fabric indeed, and you want to do the hidden strap connectors, the next bit you have to measure along that line, make a mark that is 5/8 of an inch away from the edge of the aperture, and then another mark that is, I don't think I've done my aperture in exactly the right place actually, but never mind, because it feels too close to the edge. That is an inch further along. So the aperture side, one mark 5/8 of an inch along, another mark an inch along. Then you're going to use a craft knife or a pair of scissors or something of that ilk, craft knife. I have no clue what I've done with my craft knife. I appear to have put it down. I thought I had it here, but I don't. No, I do. I'm lying. And you're going to cut along between those two marks, so between the 5/8 mark and the 1 inch mark. I just find it a lot easier to do before I've added the foam. So I've made that little cut, and you can see there that I've made that cut. Now, regardless of how you're going to do the rest of your bag, you're now going to add your foam. Now, this piece of foam is actually smaller than the panel that I'm actually attaching it to, but you're going to sew baste around the outside edges to baste your foam into place, regardless of whether you're using fabric on the outside or, my foot please, my foot pedals disappeared. Regardless of what you're using on the outside or the handles, you're going to sew baste your foam at this point around the outside using an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. These stitches will be removed. Okay, so let's just imagine that that's the whole panel and I've basted all the way around the outside. Now you can see that our hole is suddenly filled with foam. What we're going to do is we're going to stitch around the outside of that aperture 1/8 of an inch outside of our original stitching. And again, this applies regardless of whether you're using fabric or cork on fabric or faux leather on the outside. Leave long thread so you can bury and tie off your threads. Oh, let's just reduce my stitch length down a little bit. I'm actually not going to bury and tie off my threads because this is just a small sample piece and you don't need to see me doing that dozens of times. This is just to kind of show you how we do this. And you're going to do this with all 5 holes that you've created, all 5 of those apertures, so 3 on the back, 2 on the front. As I say, I haven't buried and tied off my threads. So now the foam is attached. You can see it's attached around the outside of that aperture. So I'm just going to use my craft knife to cut through that foam to make a hole. You can see there that the hole goes right the way through. And then I'm very carefully from the wrong side going to use my scissors to trim away the foam inside of that line of stitching. The first line of stitching will not show because it's on the back of the fabric or on the back of the faux leather, and not on the back of the foam because you're only just applying the foam. So you should be able to trim as close as possible. I like to use a big pair of scissors, I feel more in control, to the stitching to remove the foam from the inside of your aperture. Now your aperture is open. Now we're just going to go back to where that cut line was that we made, and we're now going to, this one is not very secure either, I don't seem to be having much joy with these. We're now going to cut through the foam. So now we have, I think you can see that, a slot through the foam and the exterior. Now we're going to make this hidden strap connector. So on the end of your strap you have your flat piece that you've stitched around at the 2-inch mark, and you're going to make a mark that is 5/8 of an inch from the bottom short edge. And the same will apply if you're using fabric. You're going to fit this exactly the same way. You're going to take your strap, your handle even. I don't think I've actually cut that far enough. So I'm just going to, yeah, I haven't cut the foam properly. I'm going to take my strap, I'm going to open up that aperture that we've made, that cut that we've made, and I'm going to thread my strap through so that it goes through the foam and the faux leather. It should be a fairly snug fit, and I'm going to push it down until that 5/8 of an inch mark that we just made on the strap is actually sitting right on the top there. Let me just turn this light on because I think so the 5/8 of an inch mark is sitting right on that cut that we've made. This is the top of my bag, this is the bottom of my bag. I'm going to take my handle and I'm going to pull it down. I'm going to make sure that the bit that's on the other side is pointing towards the top of the bag. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to stitch across my strap, just my handle, just below this line that we've made. So this 3 1/8 of inch mark, I'm going to stitch 1/8 of an inch below it, across the strap, across the handle. It's not a strap, Christine. Now it doesn't matter if you're using the faux leather or fabric for this. You can use this, as long as you're using a non-fraying fabric for the outside, this technique will work for either. You can back stitch a stitch at the beginning and the end. So now your line of stitching is just below the cut. You can see it's 1/8 of an inch below the cut. We're now going to take our handle and pull it back up again. And now we're going to do a line of stitching that's 1/8 of an inch away from that fold that you've created. Again, you can bury and tie off your threads. What we're going to try and do is create a square of stitching with the cross in the middle. I'm not burying and tying off, I'm just back stitching because this is just to demonstrate how this works. So by doing that first line of stitching, it's just across the bottom here, 1/8 of an inch above that fold. Now I'm going to take my ruler and I'm going to mark 3/4 of an inch above that join, and I'm going to stitch from this corner to this corner, from this corner to this corner. So I'm going to create that nice cross effect that we have on when we secure our straps. Now, if you prefer, you could just use a rivet. I like to stitch because I just think it looks nice, and the whole idea of this bag was that it wasn't going to be heavy with hardware, so lots of rivets and such like. So you will need to flatten down your handle as you go, just to make sure that you can get a nice clean line. I've got the thread end caught there, I need to pull that out. There we go. So you would tie off your thread ends rather than back stitching and using your thread cutter. And there you can see we have a perfectly secured strap. You can remove the cork mark, and that's perfect. Now, if you wanted to pop a rivet through the middle, always put a little bit of fray check on the middle, on the centre of that cross, just to make sure that those stitches don't come unravelled while you're adding fray check. You do the other side of the handle in exactly the same way, the other side on the outside of the other aperture on the other side. So do these apertures first. Stitch around the outside of your foam, do the apertures first, and then carry on. You would fit a fabric handle in exactly the same way if you were doing it through faux leather. If you're going to do a fabric handle, let's just show you. I'm not actually going to put it in the right place, I'm just going to stitch it. If you've got a fabric handle and you're using either faux leather or you're using fabric for the outside, you will have a raw edge on one end, and you don't want that to be seen. So at the same point, so that's 5/8 of an inch away from the side of your aperture, and at that 3 1/8 of an inch mark, I'm going to do it over here, even though it's not quite right. Once you've put your foam on, add your strap. If you add your strap facing down so that the raw edge is facing upwards, so the right side of your strap is facing the outside of your bag, on that line, on that 3 1/8 inch line. Now obviously I've got a strap there already, so I'm going to pop it over here, and you need to just stitch across the end of your strap using a 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. I keep calling them straps, and I know they're not. Let's just use that to hold that in place. So I've stitched across at 1/8 of an inch. I'm going to fold my strap up. I'm going to finger press it, and in exactly the same way as we did just now, I'm going to stitch across the bottom edge at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Again, you would always tie off and bury your threads as opposed to just back stitching and using the thread cutter as I'm doing, but this is purely just to show you how the actual stages 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5, so to speak. Again, we're going to make that mark that's 3/4 of an inch from our line of stitching, and we're going to make that cross. And that's how you would fit a fabric handle onto either faux leather or onto a fabric exterior. You can only use this hidden connector if you're using leather on the outside, a faux leather on the outside, but you could use either a fabric or a faux leather handle within that effect. So that's those two options. Now let's have a look at my one that I'm actually doing. And first things first is this is a fabric exterior with faux leather handles. First things first, I'm going to sew baste around the outside. Oops. And you can see again, I've actually got my foam is considerably bigger, probably half an inch, quarter of an inch all the way around than my fabric, because I just prefer to cut my foam just a little bit bigger. I find it's a lot easier. There's so many processes in bag making. If you can find a way of making just one of them quicker, it makes the whole thing quicker. As you're sew basting your fabric, make sure you smooth it out so that it's nice and taut across the top of your foam. That will help to make your finished bag look less kind of crumpled. It's easy to sometimes, that especially if you're using fabric, sometimes it kind of bags out over the top of foam, and I just don't like it. So just tighten it up as you're stitching, but don't pull it so hard that you pull it out of shape, because then nothing will fit properly. And you're going to follow the exact same process on the front and the back. Remember, when you're sew basting, you're basting using the longest stitch length you have on your machine. This machine has a number 6, so that should be 6mm long. Some will only have up to a 4, and that's fine. And if you're concerned about basting stitches, use a different coloured thread, something brightly coloured. You don't need to back stitch at the beginning or the end, you just need to stitch. It's just to secure your fabric to your foam. So I'm going to trim away the excess foam. So the only time when you don't put the foam on first is when you're making that cut. And I just find it easier to cut through the faux leather and then cut through the foam. If you feel that you can confidently cut through both at the same time, you can put your foam on first. It's really not a problem. So now I'm going to top stitch for the second time around these apertures. Oopsie daisy, let's find a long thread. In fact, let's change the thread full stop, because I've got red top stitching around the rest of them. So let's change my thread to red. This machine takes me just a little bit longer to thread. It's got a few extra bits on it than my normal machine, so it's and this does have a needle threader, but I'm not very good with needle threaders. So we'll just use the lick and stick. I'll pull my thread up from the bottom so that I've got going to reduce my stitch length, and I'm just going to stitch around these apertures using an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance, leaving a long thread at the beginning and the end to tie off. gone all the way around the outside, and I'm just going to bury that thread. Oh, my tummy's rumbling now. Must be lunchtime. And I'm just going to trim off the ends. Now I noticed as I went round there, you can see that that corner hasn't caught the stitching. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to fix that because I don't like that. So I'm using my self-threading needle. I've got a small bit of thread that I've just literally cut off, and I'm just going to go, I put a knot in one end. I'm just going to go through where I think that stitch should have caught. I'm going through from the back to the front. I'm going to put my needle underneath the thread on the front, she says. I'm trying to hold it up, which means that I can't actually see what I'm doing. And then I'm going to pull it back out and go back through the hole that I came through, which should pull that stitch back out so that it's now square. And then I'm going to take the thread at the back and I'm not going to tie it off then, apparently, and I'm going to tie that off, and that will keep that stitch on the front of my work so that it sits nice and square. I see a lot of people that have issues with that, and it's not something I've had on my normal machine. So this is, I don't know if this is something to do with this machine or it's just an anomaly. Perhaps I lifted my foot too soon, I'm not sure, but that's how to fix it. You don't necessarily need to unpick and unravel, you just need to catch that stitch. So I'm going to do the same around this aperture. I'm pulling my work out, taking my thread ends and self-threading needle through to the corner, through to the back, and tying off. And then in the same way as we did with the faux leather, we're going to cut through that foam inside of the apertures, and then from the wrong side we're going to very carefully trim away the foam. Be careful that you are only trimming the foam. You don't want to cut into your stitches, neither do you want to cut your fabric that's on the front of your bag, but you do need to get as close to your stitching as possible because you don't want any foam to show from the front. I'm not sure which is the best thing to offer, a big pair of scissors or a small pair. I feel more in control of something bigger. I've got big hands, so small scissors don't really sit well with me. Whatever you feel most comfortable using, just make sure whatever you do it really carefully. So there, from the front we can't see, we've got nice holes with no foam showing. So we are now going to make our mark that is 3 1/8 of an inch from the top edge. And that should sit nicely, approximately halfway. You can see that sits pretty much, let me just put something behind there that's light so you can see it. It sits pretty much halfway down my aperture. And I'm going to make a mark that is 5/8 of an inch from the outside edge of my aperture. So that's one. And in this instance, I'm using a faux leather strap, a faux leather handle on a fabric exterior, so we can't bury the end of the handle, because obviously this is a woven fabric. What I will do, just to make it easier to sew, is on the reverse, so on the back of my strap, handle rather, I'm just going to trim off those corners on the inside. It just means that when you're going across the bottom there, you're not got too much thickness when you're stitching, and I'm going to do that on both ends. It's not mandatory, but it does help with the stitching. If you've got a machine that doesn't like layers, you need to make sure that you've got nice straight ends on your handles, which I have. And I'm going to take my handle, so the seam is on the back, and I'm going to lay it on that, sit it on that 3 1/8 of an inch line with the side butted up against that 5/8 of an inch mark, and I'm going to stitch across the bottom of the strap. Now this is a raw edge strap, except for I need my long threads. I don't appear to have them, because I am going to bury my threads here. I'm going to change my thread back to green, because that's what happens when you change your top stitching thread all the time. I didn't want my top stitching on my red faux leather to be red, but the top stitching on the fabric is red. This bag has been requested, and the colourways are not my choice. They are the choice of my sister, who is quite specific with what she likes and what she doesn't like. So I'm doing as I'm told, which makes a nice change for me. Let's just put that out of the way. So you can see this actually doesn't take very long, but it's quite convoluted to show you, because I'm showing you 3 different methods all in one kind of go. Okay, so once again, let's take our strap, our handle even. I must stop calling it a strap. Mark the line that's 3 1/8 from the top, 5/8 from the side of the aperture, and position your handle 5/8 of an inch to the outside of your aperture. The handles always go on the outside of the apertures, not on the inside. And I'm going to leave long thread, and I'm going to stitch across the bottom of the strap. This is a raw edge strap. Let's just shorten my seam, my stitch length. I'm going to stitch across the bottom, and then I should have done this before. I'm just going to make a mark that is 3/4 of an inch up from the bottom edge, and again I'm going to make that square with a cross in it. So I've created the bottom line. I'm now going to go on the diagonal. Across the top of that square. And back to where we started, raise my foot for my workout, leave long threads, take my threads from the front to the back and bury them. Sometimes it's quite tough to push your needle through when you've got faux leather there, but if you find it tough, then use either use something, a thimble, or use something like a piece of a handle on something, just to kind of push the end of your needle through. Don't hurt your fingers doing it. Now, if you wanted to add a rivet, again, you can do that, but you need to put a little bit of fray check. Don't be tempted to add a rivet above that that square of stitching, because this is where the handle is. This is where the flap is going to sit, behind the top part of the handle. If you put a rivet there, then the flap won't sit properly. So I'm going to fit my other side of my handle. Make sure that your handle isn't twisted when you position the second side. So you want to make sure that it sits nice and flat and everything's looking hunky-dory, which that is. And you're then going to, leaving long threads at the beginning and the end, do the exact same process again. So you're going across between the two lines of stitching that you've already done on the outside. Oh, I didn't measure that again. I am hopeless, I've decided. This is what happens when you talk and sew at the same time. You kind of forget what you're doing. If you feel more comfortable marking out the entire sort of cross in the middle before you do, then please feel free to do so. I generally do it by eye, and I find it's okay. And as you've just seen, I'm not very good at the old remembering to measure, which is probably why I do things by eye, because I forget to measure, but never mind. So we tie off those threads, and there we go. And now we have our handle fitted, and this is a faux leather handle on a fabric bag. You can now wipe off those chalk marks, or if you've used a Fritz-on pen or whatever you've used as your marker, you can wipe those off. You don't need those marks anymore. And that's the front. You're going to do exactly the same with your rear panel. You need to do the stitching around the outside of that central aperture in the same way as you do with the outside ones, and trim away the foam. But obviously the handles go to the outside of the two outside apertures. So I'm going to carry on and do my back, and then I'll come back and show you how to do the sides.